Hi, and welcome back to Bill's Sickler Room. Today I'd like to talk about the impacts the UK energy price increases is starting to have on the hobby and what could happen during the next 12 months. I'll include views from other hobbyists, shop owners, club members, fellow YouTubers, and offer some hints and tips to lessen the impact for each of us onto the hobby. The increase of electricity costs worldwide is alarming at the moment, particularly in the UK, so I thought it would be a good idea to ask fellow hobbyists and retailers what they're doing about it and any thoughts they might have for the aquarium hobby during the next 12 months and beyond. I put a post up on Facebook in the middle of August on the Preston and District Aquatic Society Facebook page. The Preston Club has a lot of members who are both hobbyists and work within the industry, so I thought I would get a good cross section of opinions. I also reached out to a lot of friends within the hobby, both club members and fellow YouTubers, to ask their views and what, if anything, they think the impact would be on the hobby during the next 12 months. To give you an indication of the impacts to myself, based in the north of England, my energy bills to run the fish room were £90 a month back in May 2020, and they've now gone up to £260 a month from April 2022. So what I'm running, it's actually 20 tanks and a pond in total. So reading up on the increased predictions from various sources, the average cost of a kilowatt of energy was 19 pence per last year. It's up to 28 pence at the moment and expected to go up to 51 pence at the end of January. That would be an increase of over 2.5 times in 1 year. When I reset up the fish room back in 2020, as you know, I only set up half of it from what I had running over 10 years ago. The room itself is well insulated with rock wool and polystyrene on the ceiling. I moved over from internal fluval canister filters to air-driven sponge filters, and in fact it's a 20 watt air pump that I use for the filtration for the whole of the fish room. I also moved over from fluorescent lights to LED strip lights. I currently use 3 of them at 10 watts each, running for 9 hours per day. The biggest usage in the fish room is the electricity, of course, and that's to run the heaters. I currently run 7 300 watt heaters, 4 200 watt heaters and 7 25 watt heaters. I run the tank at a temperature of 78 degrees Fahrenheit, so that's about 26 degrees Celsius. As well as having the room insulated, I've wrapped all the fish tanks in insulated bubble wrap, the bottoms and the sides, and I make sure that I have close fitting glass on top of all the tanks, again to try and keep the heat in. I also have 2 aquariums in the living room upstairs, a 4 foot and a 3 foot, and I've also moved over to sponge filters and LED lights on those. So to recap, that's 20 tanks of various sizes I'm currently running, and of course the garden pond. There is still more I can do to reduce the cost of running the fish room, but more on that later in the video. For the house itself, to try and help reduce the bills, I'm actually in the process of getting new double glazed doors and windows fitted, all with the intention of reducing the energy bills. From asking around all my friends and the comments that I got on the Facebook post, the feedback I've had from other hobbyists is surprisingly encouraging. A lot of them are on fixed term contracts, so what that means in the UK is it's a monthly fixed fee for a period of time. So a number of them are on the fixed term contracts that run till the end of 2023. So although they are aware of the increases, you can't really miss them if you watch the news, it's not affecting them at the moment. Although the majority of fellow fish keepers are already doing something or considering doing something, not one person I spoke to is thinking about closing down completely and coming out the hobby. This has to be good news for the longevity of the hobby and of course the aquatic trade. A number of people with fish rooms have either moved over onto sponge filters or are seriously considered doing so in the next 12 months. There's obviously a few people who have started closing down some tanks, but it is more consolidating the fish room than closing down completely. So for some hints and tips to help reduce the energy costs, the important point here, and I've got to stress this and stress it again, the important point is always the well-being of the fish we keep. So before doing any of the following, always research the species and make any changes that you do make gradually. Number 1, consider reducing the temperature that we run our tanks. A lot of us run our tanks at 78 degrees Fahrenheit because that's a good middle ground for the vast majority of the fish we keep, and we've always been told that this is the optimum temperature. In the wild during the changing seasons, temperatures change. You could consider running your tanks seasonally, that is dropping the temperature during the winter and increasing during the summer by a couple of degrees. Also, research the species you keep. I have recently obtained a group of dambuff that come from Madagascar, and during the winter the temperatures quite often drop down to 66 Fahrenheit. That's a huge change from 78 degrees, so that's something that I will be considering, is dropping the temperature down on those tanks gradually. Lighting. Unless we're running a lush planted tank or indeed a saltwater tropical marine tank with corals, we probably all run our lights too much. Change over to the more efficient LED lights and reduce the hours that you have the lights on. I currently run mine from 12 noon to 9 PM on 2 strips, with the other running 7 AM to 9 PM, so that I can check on the fish before I leave for work and still be able to see them during the evening. But this is just for my benefit, not the fish's. The fish don't need the lights on for that long. The other thing you could do is consider keeping more temperate fish. This is a point that was raised over and over by a number of hobbyists, and it's something that I'll be definitely looking into in the future. So what we mean by temperate fish, it's fish that come from or don't need the water to be as hot. So a good example for that, I suppose, that comes straight to mind is the white cloud mountain minnows. I mean, you can keep them in, it's a room temperature tank, so a room temperature probably being about 20 degrees Celsius or around about 65-66 degrees Fahrenheit. The other hint is insulate. The biggest cost, as I've mentioned before, is the heating of the tanks. Insulate the back, sides and the bottom of as many of your tanks as you can. You only need to see the fish through the front, and obviously you need to keep the top of the tank for the lighting and to get access for maintenance and feeding. But try to keep the heat in the tank means that you're not reheating the water once it cools down. Another point you could consider doing is reduce the percent of cold water changes. I currently do a 30% cold water change on all my tanks with water from the mains. During winter and even summer, the water that comes out the mains is a lot cooler than the 78 degrees that I would be heating it up to. So what you could do is consider doing less frequent water changes, say every 10 days instead of every 7, and getting new water heated up to room temperature by keeping in a bucket for 24 hours with an air stone to keep it circulated. This also has the added benefit of killing off any chlorine that might be in the water. If you test for the nitrates, this will let you know if you're changing your water too often. So if your nitrates is like 50 parts per million or less, you probably don't need to do a water change. If it gets up to 100-150 parts per million, obviously you do. In a low density aquarium that's only fed once a day, that doesn't have many fish in it, you may find that once every 14 to 21 days is often enough. This will save a huge amount of energy reheating the water. Again, if you're doing anything like this, always keep the well-being of the fish in mind. Don't do it all at once. If you're going from 7 days to 21 days, do it over a couple of months. So 7 days, 10 days, 21 days, 25 days. Otherwise you could cause more harm than what you want to. The view from the aquatic trade. The local fish shop's been hit hard over the last few years, with COVID forcing businesses to shut for months, rising freight costs and getting both livestock and equipment into the shop, and its result in general increases in the supply of goods in general. It's felt that during COVID a number of people did start in the hobby or came back to the hobby like myself, which has also helped local businesses in the short term. With new people coming into the hobby, the trick is to keep them in the hobby so that we have a hobby in the future. Again, a lot of the businesses spoke to are on fixed term contracts for the next year or two, but they are being hit with increased costs from the suppliers, as I mentioned, for freight or just the general increase in goods. I'm also told that the pond season has been slow this year for a lot of retailers, which means it's even more important for all those hobbies to support our local fish shops, because as the saying goes, once they're gone, they're gone. A Northwest fish owner that I know has done a rough guide on the running costs of a 105 litre aquarium based on a cost of 28 pence per kilowatt. His findings came out at £9.49 per month, so 105 litre aquarium, that's roughly a 2-foot tank. So if you multiply that by the number of the footage of tanks and the volume of water that I'm keeping, it probably works out about the same as what I'm experiencing. Some retailers I spoke to said they're now being asked about more energy efficient equipment and more temperate fish than ever before, and they see it as a duty to provide good advice to keep the hobby going. A few of the people that I spoke to, they also feel that the more specialist fish shops that cater for the hardcore fish keepers like myself and other fish YouTubers would be alright, but they do expect a downturn in the number of new people coming into the hobby, which typically starts off with your bread and butter species fish. It's important to support your local fish shop, even if it's just getting a tub of food or medication from them, instead of reaching out to Amazon and getting it delivered. So what's the conclusions that I've come to from the research I've been doing? As I've already mentioned, there's a lot of ways to run your aquarium more efficiently to keep the costs down. Consider other ways to reduce costs of running the fish room, such as buying your food in bulk. I'm sure if you ask your local fish shop, they'll tell you what's available. Making your own frozen food, this can save you a fortune in the blister packs. Also, talk to fellow hobbyists, go on Facebook, do some research and ask what other people are doing. You never know, they might come up with something that you've never thought of and I've not mentioned here in the video. So although the costs are rising and are still expected to rise in the UK for the next 12 months, by following some of the tips mentioned in this video and others that I haven't even thought of, I'm sure the hobby will continue, and if the government managing to get a handle on reducing the costs to manageable levels, obviously that's all going to help. At the end of the day, for most of us, it's a hobby. We've done it for many years and it's in our blood. Although I might eventually have to close down some of the tanks and generally downscale, I don't see myself coming completely out the hobby. Even when I closed the fish room down for 10 years, I still kept one aquarium going in the living room and stayed a member of the Northwest Cichlid group, being on the committee, attending the meetings and also attending and helping to run the auctions. I've been keeping fish since I was 8 years old and I don't see myself coming out the hobby anytime soon. Thanks for watching. I think you're a great all food for thought. Anything that we can do to help reduce the energy costs obviously keeps us in the hobby longer. If anyone's got any more tips on reducing the running costs, please leave them in the comments. I'll feature them in future videos so that we can all benefit. So thanks for watching and I'll see you all on the next video.